Oh, thank you. We'll try that again. Hello, and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. My name is Kelly Asprooth-Jackson, and I am one of the ministers here. Today, I am joined by the worship team of Linda Warren, Daniel Carnes, and Stephen Gregorius. The vision of FUS is growing souls, connecting with one another, and embodying our UU values in our lives, our community, and our world. We look forward to greeting you for coffee hour outside. We're going to have it inside today. So right out there, through those doors, across the way in the Commons. After the service today, we will be also having an intergenerational activity as we join together in decorating little people paper shapes in order to make a network of humanity. So I hope that you will join us in making something beautiful together. All ages are welcome and encouraged. If you're visiting us today, welcome. We are very glad that you are with us. If you'd like more information about First Unitarian Society, please stop by the welcome table that is also located through those doors in the Commons. We hope we'll be able to say hi to you at coffee hour. For those connecting with us virtually today, we are glad that you are with us, and we hope that you will be able to join us for our virtual coffee hour immediately following our service. The information for joining can be found on the homepage of our website, fusmadison.org. And now I invite you to join me in a moment of silence to center ourselves and bring ourselves fully into this time as we join together once again in community. Blessed are we who gather with open hearts together in this space today. Blessed are we, the chalice lighters of resistance, justice, love, and faith. Blessed are we, the heretics, the outcasts, the walkers on our own way. Blessed are we, the border crossers, the refugees, the immigrants, the poor, the wanderers who are not lost. Blessed are we, the transgressors, the trespassers, the passers-by, the cause-takers, the defiant, the compliant. Blessed are we, the hand extenders, the sign makers, the protesters, the protectors. Blessed are we, the trans women, the trans men, the non-binary, the cisgender, the multigender, the no gender. Blessed are we, the friend, the stranger, the lonely, the hidden, the visible, the authentic. Blessed are we who rise in solidarity. Blessed are we who cannot. Blessed are we who do not. Blessed are we, for this is our beloved community, and this is who we are. Now I invite you to rise in all the ways that we do, and join me in the words of aspiration for the kindling of our chalice flame. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundation of freedom, reason, and tolerance, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that visions a world flourishing with equality for all her people, a faith that demands living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. Rise up, O flame, by now I'd like to tell you a story. And if anyone would like to come up and join me up here, you're welcome to do so. You're also welcome to be where you are. No pressure. So I want to tell you a story today that is a fairy tale. And it's a very old fairy tale, but I'm willing to guess that most of you haven't heard it before. I hadn't until very recently. And that's because, even though it's an old story, it was told for a long time, when it came time to write down the old stories, the stories that people told one another for years and years and years, when it came time to write them down for the first time, there were some people who decided they didn't like this story, so they didn't write it down. Or rather, they did, but then they cut it out of the books. And maybe you'll have an idea about why by the end of this story. Maybe you won't. We can talk about it after the service. So here's the story. Once there was a young man who wanted to be a sailor. He wanted to sail ships on the sea. And his mother was not pleased with this plan of his because she loved him and she liked having him around. And the thing about being a sailor, especially in those days, is you spent a lot of time away from home. But he was her son, and she did love him. And it must be said that he tried to do a lot of other things besides be a sailor, and he wasn't good at any of them. So she said, all right, go with my blessing, go to sea. But I want you to take 3 things. First, she gave him a purse that had all the money that she had in the world in it, so that he'd have something. It wasn't a lot, but it was something. And she gave him a bottle of medicine in case he got hurt, and she gave him a dagger to protect himself. Remember those 3 things. So he went to sea. He signed up, got on a ship, they set out from port, they sailed out on the ocean, and a storm came, and the whole ship crashed. And he washed up on a faraway shore, far from home, where he didn't know anybody, didn't have very much, he didn't have any friends. So he spent the little money that he had in that purse from his mother. Soon it was all gone. And he was walking along the beach one day, thinking what he was going to do in this strange place where he found himself. There was a dog playing in the ocean. Just like that. You got it. Bingo. The dog paddled up to him, walked out of the surf a little bit, and it said, "You look sad." He was a little confused because most dogs don't talk, even in stories. And the dog said, "What is it that's worrying you, friend?" And he explained that he'd been a sailor, hadn't gotten very far, and been shipwrecked, and he'd spent all the money that his mother gave him. The dog said, "Well, how about this? I'll make sure that there's always money in your purse. There's always money for you to spend. But you have to promise that if you spend the money, you will always pay twice what you are asked." He said, "All right, well, as long as there's going to be money, how can I say no?" Right? So he looked in the purse again, and there were some coins there. He went into town, and he bought himself a meal. And at the end of the meal, they gave him the bill, and he put down twice what they were asking for. And he looked in the purse again afterwards, and there were the same number of coins as there were the first time he looked in. So it seemed like it was working. So he bought himself a house and a carriage, and he threw a big party, and suddenly this person who was new in town and didn't know anybody had all these friends. Sometimes it works that way. And each time, he just made sure to pay twice what anybody was asking for. And it worked. And he was happy for a while. But parties don't last forever, even if the money doesn't run out. And so eventually, he found himself walking by the sea again, feeling happy, his belly was full, but sad because he didn't know what to do with himself. And then along came that dog again. He said, "Aren't you happy that you've got this magic purse?" He said, "Well, I thought I would be, but it doesn't quite seem to be enough." The dog said, "Well, I don't have anything else to give you, but I do have something to ask you. You see, I need your help if you're looking for something to do." He said, "Boy, I guess I am." So the dog asked him to get a ship built and to hire a crew. And he had all this money, so that wasn't a problem. And now he set out to sea. He wasn't just a sailor, he was a captain now. He had his own ship. And the dog told him where to sail towards, a place that the man had never been before, had never heard of even. But he listened to the dog because he'd gotten this far. And in the course of sailing, they came into a storm, a terrible storm. High winds and strong rain. It seemed like the ship might capsize and wreck, just like the first one that the sailor had been on. But the dog said, "You take the rest of the crew and you go below deck. I'm going to wait up here. Make sure that you're safe." At the end of the storm, when the winds quieted down, the rain stopped, the sailor and his crew came up from below deck, came up to the top of the ship, and the dog was still there, but he'd been hurt in the course of the storm. He'd been hurt in the course of the storm. And without even thinking about it, the sailor took out that bottle of medicine that his mother had given him, and he used it to help heal the dog's wounds. So they made it to their destination, a place that no one had ever been before. There was just a little tiny hill sticking out of the ocean, like it was the very top of a mountain. And the dog said, "I need you to go down there." Well, he didn't point, he sort of gestured with his nose. And the sailor wouldn't have done this for anybody except for this dog. So he threw a ladder over the side of the boat. He went down onto the little tiny piece of dry land, and he just walked right down into the sea. And he walked until he was swimming, and he swam until at the bottom of the ocean he was walking again. And he could breathe even though he was underwater, and it didn't make a lot of sense. But he could see that there was a whole big island underneath the ocean, like it had sunk down to the bottom, full of buildings and cities. And in the middle of the largest city, there was a tall castle. And in that tall castle, there was a witch. Now, witches in stories are usually bad. Witches in reality are actually usually good. And so I don't want to prejudice you about witches in general. But in this story, the witch is bad. However, she's also very beautiful. The most beautiful woman that this sailor had ever seen in his life. And she said that she was in charge of this island. She had taken it below the waves and taken control of it. And now that he was here, she would be willing to share it with him. He could have half of the whole place. They could be in charge together. All he had to do was let her keep being in charge of the island. And he listened to her offer, and he considered it. But even though no one who lived on that island before, no one she had ever met in her life had been able to say no to her, he did. We might think about why that was. Again, maybe we'll talk about this after the service. So, he said no. She said, "Well, then we're going to have to fight." And this is where the dagger comes into play. And I don't want you to think that I'm encouraging you to resolve your problems with knives. This is just the way that the story goes. And stories don't always have the best ideas in every part of them. But the point is that they fought, and he won. And so now here he was in this empty island underneath the sea. There were no other people around. But he went down in the dungeons of the castle. And there weren't people there, but then the prison cells, there were all these different animals, every possible animal you can imagine. There were parrots and zebras and marmosets and alpacas, and there was a lion. And there was the dog, that dog that he'd been talking to this whole time, just walking around and said, "Can you open this cage for me?" And he opened the cage to where the lion was, even though he was pretty afraid because it's a lion. And when he opened the cage, the lion turned back into a human being. It was the king of the island, you understand. And when they freed all of the other animals, the animals turned back into human beings because the witch's curse had been lifted. And the king looked at the dog and kissed its head, and that is when the dog turned into a human as well. The king's son, the prince of the island, who had been the only one who got free enough to go and find help. So, the king was very pleased with the sailor, and he said, "I would like to give you half of my country, and my son will have the other half, and you can be in charge together." The prince thought this was a good idea. The sailor liked the idea a lot, but he missed his mother. So he said, "I'm afraid that I have to go home." So he went home, and he told his mother the whole story, just like I'm telling you now, though in a little bit more personal way. And his mother said, "So wait a second. The king offered you half the kingdom, and the prince was excited to share it with you. And you love the prince, don't you?" The sailor said yes to all the questions. His mother said, "Well, then what are we waiting for? Let's go home." And so they did. Thanks for listening to the story. I invite you now into a time of giving and receiving, where we give freely and generously to this offering which sustains First Unitarian Society and its work in the world. You'll see on the screen that you can donate directly from our website, fusmadison.org. There's also text to give information there as well. There are, in addition, baskets at the exits to the auditorium in which cash or checks may be placed. We thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life we create together. So I want to tell you another story now. The story comes from the Gullah people. For almost 250 years, people from the African continent were stolen, captured, brought in chains to this part of the world, and made to work at hard labor. They were kept as slaves. One of the innumerable things that is so evil and wrong about slavery is the way that it depended on, focused on, erasing culture and language from the people forced to be slaves. The Gullah people are originally from Africa, brought here to this part of the world, specifically to the coast of North and South Carolina and northern Georgia. And they are notable for how successful they were at resisting that erasure of culture and language. There was resistance many different places, here in North America as well as in South America and the Caribbean. But the Gullah folks succeeded to a degree that is notable. And that is part of why they have their own name and their own shared culture, the way in which they were able to keep some of the traditions alive from Africa across hundreds of years of violence and oppression. So this is one of their stories. Once there was a woman, a mother, who was working in the field because she had been enslaved. She was forced to work. She didn't have a choice. She was working in the field all day long with her baby on her back because there was no one else to look after it. Well, the mother had to work. And the sun was hot, the day was long, and eventually the baby started to cry because it was thirsty. And so she paused what she was doing so that she could give the child a drink. And the overseer saw her stop and didn't like it. He was a hard-hearted man. And he punished her very severely for the crime of giving a drink to her child. It's an ugly and terrible thought, but a real experience across the history of this country. So we have to be honest about it if we are to be honest about ourselves. So here is this woman, this mother, kneeling in the field, her body and her heart both deeply, deeply hurting. And one of the elders, another enslaved man, came to her and asked her what was wrong, and she said, "I can't stay here, or I'll forget myself." And he whispered her some words from before they'd been brought on ships, some words from home. And they filled her heart, and she floated up into the air. And she flew away, and she never had to go back again. And the same man went walking through the fields, whispering the same words to each of the enslaved people in turn. And each of them floated up into the air and flew away. Never had to work in that place anymore. Sometimes we tell stories not because they literally happened, because I don't think that the Gullah folks think this story literally happened, but as a way to remember what should happen, what should have happened in the past, what ought to happen in the future. Well, folks, I invite you now to rise in body and or spirit. Join me in singing hymn number 130, O Liberating Road. 15 years ago, I served as an intern minister at Arlington Street Church in Boston. It's possible you've heard of it before. It is occasionally referred to as the Mother Church of American Unitarianism. Although, to be fair, you're more likely to hear that from folks within the congregation than from anyone else, anywhere else in the world. But there is an argument for the claim. You see, Arlington Street was the home pulpit of William Ellery Channing for almost 4 decades, although it was actually the Federal Street Church in those days. And Channing is remembered as the grandfather of American Unitarianism, not its inventor, but its first great popularizer and articulator. When tour groups, often coming-of-age classes visiting Boston from other distant congregations, would pass through, we would invite the teenagers to take turns speaking from the great high pulpit, to take in the commanding view of the massive room with its wraparound balcony and Tiffany windows. And because most folks didn't come with something to recite memorized in advance, we'd give them a particular text to read aloud, one by Channing himself. In the piece, the preacher attempts to define what it means to be spiritually free. I explain all of this to give you some sense of the importance of this particular document to who we are, what we are about as Unitarian Universalists. It is perhaps the most quoted passage by one of our foundational theological ancestors. Here's just one small bit of it. I call that mind free, which resists the bondage of habit, which does not mechanically repeat itself and copy the past, which does not live on old virtue, which does not enslave itself to precise rules, but forgets what is behind, listens for new and higher monitions of conscience, and rejoices to pour in fresh and higher exertions. Freedom is integral to our religious tradition. Freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, the freedom to seek out what is true and right in life. From long before Channing, our spiritual ancestors have dreamed of and fumbled towards something rare and verging on unique in human religion. A faith in which uniformity of belief is neither required, nor expected, nor desired, and one which advocates for a larger world in which no one religion is given any public preference, not even our own. Much of this stems from our history as heretics, the centuries in which it was illegal to practice the precursors to modern Unitarian Universalism. Times when our ideas were forbidden, our books were routinely burned, when our spiritual forebears were ostracized, jailed, and in some cases killed for what they believed. But for the last 200-odd years, at least in this part of the world, we have not had any of those problems, or at least not on the same scale. Less threatened and endangered than at any other time in our history, this breathing room has given us space for the better and sometimes for the worse, to ponder and to quarrel about what exactly the purpose of our beloved freedom ought to be. Why make a religion of religious freedom in a place and time in which religious freedom is, at least theoretically, assured? Now, June, especially late June, is the time of most public celebrations of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, genderqueer, and otherwise queer pride, at least here in the United States. A time for parades, parties, festivals, public displays of art, and other ways to affirm everyone who comes under that umbrella of identities. The gatherings might be large or small, they might be raucous or sedate, but they always are or are intended to be joyful. Similarly, today is Juneteenth, and long before it became a national holiday, it was, as it remains, a day of celebration in the Black community, a time for barbecues, church field days, and family and community gatherings. Both of these celebrations have their origin in struggle. The reason Pride festivals often happen in late June is to place them close to the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which, just to remind you, in 1969, a long pattern of official harassment and police persecution of women who love women, men who love men, and folks who refuse to be caged by expectations around gender sparked several days of protests in New York City. At the forefront of those protests were trans women, drag queens, and other gender transgressors. And together with gay, lesbian, and bisexual folks, they risked arrest and, in some cases, their very lives in order to demand the right to be and to be in public without having to pretend to be anything other or less than fully themselves. And again, to remind us, Juneteenth comes from the end of the Civil War, when freedom from slavery finally went into practical effect in Texas, the westernmost state in and one of the most isolated regions of the Confederacy. Newly liberated Black folks spread the word from town to town and plantation to plantation, helping cousins and neighbors and strangers connected by the same anti-human system of slavery to rid themselves of it and to celebrate and give thanks for their liberation. Why am I going into all this, other than a coincidence of the calendar? Because these struggles are not over. Black liberation is not fully accomplished today, nor is queer liberation. Overt hatred and bigotry persist, as well as the pernicious structures of injustice which diminish the health, well-being, and dignity of people on the basis of their skin color, whom they love, or how they understand and express the truth of who they are. The joy of these celebrations is not because the work is done. Rather, loud, collective, public joy is among the most defiant expressions of freedom. When you've been told over and over you should be ashamed to exist, or that you should accept your lot and be less than, it is revolutionary to be proud and happy to be who you are. And this brings us back around to we Unitarian Universalists. Now, some of us are Black. Some of us are trans. Some of us are gay or lesbian or bi or pan. Some of us are indigenous or other people of color. Some of us are women. Some of us are disabled. Some of us are poor. And all of us have a shared religious commitment to spiritual freedom. And so I submit to you that we are fooling ourselves if we think that we can simply draw a line between freedom of the spirit or the mind on one side, devoting ourselves only to the realm of the esoteric and the abstract, and ignore the freedom of the body and the realm of the practical. You see, our tradition has also long held that the practical effect is the only right measure of the quality of any belief. This, then, is our work. We are here to help each other and anyone and everyone we can possibly join forces with to get free. Insofar as I can see from the ideals we have espoused and promoted since Channing and before him, the project of this religion is meant to be the collective liberation of ourselves and everyone else who needs it. That may sound grandiose and startlingly more direct than we are used to being in discussing ourselves, but it's the only conclusion that I can personally draw from the tradition I was taught as a child and have been teaching to others ever since. The good news, friends, is that this is not and cannot be a joyless struggle, for joy is essential to how our struggle is waged. We gather each week, creating a community of love and support, a place and a time where we can share the celebrations and sorrows of our days. Mary Murphy asked us to light a candle of gratitude that her husband, Joe, is now home from the hospital and rehab unit and able to do the things he likes to do. We celebrate that blessing with the both of you. There. Mike Linnau asks us to light a candle for his father, Dan, who is at UW Hospital right now and could use some positive thoughts as he faces health and mobility challenges related to a persistent wound on his leg. We light a candle in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, both in their suffering and their struggle. Together we yearn for peace for them and for all people, and an end to all wars of conquest, anywhere and everywhere on earth. And we light a candle for the celebration of Father's Day, honoring and appreciating all the dads who do the work and know the joy of fathering. We hold tenderly at the same time all who struggle on this day because of the loss of a father or their absence or their faults, because of the loss of a child or the absence of children entirely. And I invite you now to turn with me both inward and outward as we enter together into an attitude of meditation and of prayer. On this day, let us offer our thanks for every pain kissed, hugged, or soothed away, for every fear comforted, for every tear dried, for every wound healed, for every hour of loneliness broken by a generous love, for good advice and the wisdom to take it, for bad advice and the kindness to keep it to ourselves. On this day, let us offer our tears for every needed kindness undelivered, for every longed-for relationship never brought forth, for every beloved life lost to us and the world, for every celebration which our own pain prevents us from sharing. On this day, let us offer our grateful, tearful hearts for those who rear children and those who help them do it, for those who are children and those who have ever been, for the mystery of life which passes from parent to child, generation after generation, and for the universal generosity of the earth which cradles us from long before we are born until long after we have died. On this day and every day, let us be thankful, let us be sorrowful, let us be open-hearted. Blessed be, and amen. One more time, in body and or spirit. Join me in singing hymn number 116, I'm on my way.
Come on.
remembering our spiritual, courageous ancestors who forsook oppression with security to gain freedom with opportunity. May we go forth to master ourselves by accepting duty with responsibility, by showing balance in our judgments, and by having breadth of vision in our deliberations. May we be exemplars of that spirit, moving forward with conviction and commitment, with unity and without uniformity, with brotherhood and sisterhood, to serve the truth that sets us free. Amen. Blessed be. Please be at rest for the postman.
There's a middle voice in there between the treble melody and the bass line that was really just popping beautiful. It's like C to C flat to B flat to.
Yeah. So here's the.
Yeah, that tenor line that was really coming out just beautiful.
Yeah.
That really
And of
worked.
course, I'd love to play all 90 pages of this. But
Sure.
yeah.
The next time they book you for a concert, you can do that, right? Yeah.
Start at the start and go to the end. And then I love this one.
Oh, sure.
I like the Billie Holiday piece.
Yeah.